Welcome back, everyone. Hello, Terry. So nice to
Hi.
see you. Here we are. So we were just chit-chatting a little bit as we do, and we were really kind of getting into the topic of fear, the experience of fear. We all experience fear in our life. Fear often of change, but just fear in general, whether we identify it as that or not, it's just this, and it can really contribute to us feeling very stressed, very avoidant, right? It presents itself in so many ways. But because we're in fear, and we may get into some of the nuances of like how it affects our life, maybe what is the fear really about, what's happening and all those kinds of things. But that's what we're going to kind of bring in today. So I'll just give that as a little opener. I'll pass it over to you, and then we'll just have a discussion based on, more of a conversation about what's coming up for us around fear, how it impacts us, and maybe what do we do about it, kind of a thing.
Yeah, Stacy, I tell you, I don't think we as humans realize the impact of fear. Fear, I think, is one of those emotions that gets hidden by other emotions, right? Like sometimes, I like to say that the emotion of anger is kind of like a secondary emotion. It's not really a true emotion, right? Um, and so sometimes people who are experiencing fear might display anger. Sometimes people who are experiencing fear, it comes out as anxiety, which everybody can kind of identify anxiety as some kind of fear, right? Um, Sometimes, even when people are experiencing fear, they can have a feeling of like being elated. I mean, fear can display in many different ways. But ultimately, what fear does is it really kind of holds us back from being our true, authentic, full, connected self.
Mhm.
Um, when we allow fear to really be our ruler, whether we're aware of it or not, it really is holding us back. Like it's holding us back from achieving and receiving. Receiving. Well, we're meant to receive in this life. I look back over my life. We won't get into how many years that's been, but I look back over my life and, I can pinpoint times when I know that fear held me back from moving forward with something. Where really fear itself led to a physical injury or a physical ailment
Mhm.
because my brain and my heart couldn't face following through and facing rejection
Mhm.
or facing that I would fail at something. And I think that many of us, all of us at some point, really have had situations that have been ruled by fear, even if we're not aware of it. This really has come up a lot this week for me, um, not in for my own fear, but in a relationship with someone else and their fear, and but impacting my life because of their fear. Um, and navigating that because sometimes it's not about our fear. It may be about somebody else's fear that then impacts us and our ability to move forward in what we know the universe has laid out for us, that the universe intends for us. Because I'm going to go back to what we've talked about so many times. We are so impacted by other people's energy, and our energy impacts other people, right? We talk about that over and over and over again. So if we are in a relationship with someone, whether that be our child, a friend, our spouse, whatever that be, um, their energy that they're carrying around, whether that be fear, happiness, joy, anger, it's going to bleed off of them, and it's going to attach to us in some way if we're not cleansing our own energy. But it also, when we're in those close relationships, that our decisions are impacted by that other person and their decisions. All of that kind of plays into each other. Um, Kind of goes back to the soul contract thing too. You know, we wrote these soul contracts to navigate these relationships and to be able to work through whether that was somebody else's fear or our own fear and limiting us in this lifetime.
Mhm.
Um, but it's really important that we are becoming so familiar with self and getting to know ourselves so well
Mhm.
that we understand when fear itself is holding us back.
Mhm.
Um, because the universe really, really does want to give us everything we desire. It absolutely does.
Mhm.
But when we're allowing our emotions as in this human form to block us from that, we then believe that the universe doesn't want us to have something, or that the universe is conspiring against us or whatever. But in reality, it really is coming out of our own blocks in ourselves that stop us from receiving what the universe is literally begging us to take.
Mhm.
And I'm going to volley back to you.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh, beautifully said. So, what's coming in for me right now to tag on to what you're talking about is getting connected to all that we are, our higher soul, most loving self, that is not separate from the universal energy, I would just call it. But we'll get into the how maybe in a little bit here. But the first piece about recognizing and like what are the signs that it's happening. And so one of mine, and I think this is common for people, but I can just disclose a little bit about the pattern for me, is the power of like not even knowing how powerful a part of us just has us avoid distraction. I mean, we know distractions just rampant. It's a struggle. People, we might wake up and be like, oh, I want to do this thing today. And before we know it, it's mid afternoon. We're like, where did my day go? And we wouldn't directly necessarily think that's about fear. Because some of us, I mean, when we're really high in fear, we might really, oh my gosh, I'm feeling this intense fear. But it can be so subtle. And because we're made, like we've talked about, we're meant to survive, there's this safety mechanism built in that, oh, you think you're going to go do this thing that could mean more people are going to see you. You might, it might feel like exposure or like vulnerability because we can be so afraid. We can be afraid of almost anything. You mentioned fear of failure. And then there's fear of success and how, what could the possibilities be? And it's so subconscious and out of our awareness. And of course, one of our main intentions in having these conversations and sharing this podcast to the world is about to awaken to all that we truly are, which means we're going to become aware, we're going to notice more, and then calming down some of that survival response and getting into curiosity, which we can't be in curiosity in the same moments we're in fear at high levels because we're like literally just trying to survive. So it's kind of cool. And from my experience, it's like I recognize more quickly that I've just gotten sidetracked by something in my environment. Could be my dogs, could be paying bills, whatever. But when we get more connected, we get more intentional and we get more focused. And then we get more done. We get more done faster. Like it's so cool. But we can't, well, we can try, but I know like what has not worked for me that most of us have tried for years is trying to push through and just we're in our head, not connected to heart, soul, universal energy. Then we're like, I'm doing it all on my own. I got to get this done. And subconsciously, really, it's because, well, it'll feel good to get this thing done. Nothing wrong with that. But sometimes we're using that to fill ourselves up entirely. And some the to-do lists. And it's like, that's not our soul. Our soul doesn't say, you have this to do. Well, I take that. I think there is of sorts, but I'm talking about that to-do list. That's like, I don't get to do something I enjoy, so to speak, let's say, until the to-do list is done. Every client I've ever worked with has lived, and they're mostly women, just happens to be women, not that men can't experience that, but it's really common. Go, 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 do, achieve, take care of everybody else, then I'm depleted. And we can learn that the hard way, and we often do, but there are signs. And if anyone who's in at that end of the spectrum where they're maybe close to burnout or are burnt out or exhausted, whatever, okay, boy, are you getting some signs. You talk about signs, there's physical signs in the body, all those things. And if you're not, there are ways to go about it so you don't have to get to that point. So I'll say that and pass it back on to you. Whatever comes up is great.
It's so funny as you were talking, you know, probably the biggest place where I lived in fear had everything to do with who I authentically am. And let me explain that. You know, people who may watch this or hear this and have worked with me in the past, and I've worked with a lot of people, but some of them have heard this story, some of them have not. But as a mental health therapist, telling people that you are a medium, that you also work in the spiritual realm and you do these other things is like this thing of no, 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 don't ever do that. You know, somebody's going to commit you to an insane asylum, you know. And for years, I stayed hidden in the authentic piece of who I was. And that moment where now I was already working with other people, but I was a member of this professionals page um, where someone on that page asked for someone who um, was a psychic. And I was like, oh, heck no, I am not opening my mouth. There is no way in the world. And as I've talked about in previous episodes, my spirit guide Esmeralda was like, oh, yes. And I was like, oh, no, I am not doing this. There is no way. I am not. That is literally coming out to every professional that I know. There is no way in the world I am doing this. And it's almost like, you know, if my computer could have moved towards me, like my computer would have shifted towards me. Um,
Yeah.
and I was just like, I remember, you know, saying out loud, I said, this better not backfire on me, you know, like, and I don't know. I took the leap of faith. I did not do it because I thought I was going to be caught. I'm not sure why I even did it. I was literally shaking. I'm physically shaking and was terrified and typed in just very quickly, I am a medium, contact me. And slammed my computer, I mean, slammed my computer shut before I just deleted it and walked away. And from that moment, I didn't get any negative feedback from the professional community, but I got a ton of love and I got a ton of referrals from those professionals. Um, and it was just so funny because the fear that had been controlling my life from being my authentic self for several years
Yes.
ended up being a moment for me of just pure joy and bliss.
Mhm.
And now I have to say, this podcast is going to make that a much bigger scale
Mhm.
because, you know, I don't advertise, you know, word of mouth is how people come to me.
Mhm.
I'm not really out there on a real public stage. I did that in a public private group, you know. It was the professionals that I knew for sure, but it wasn't like this. And there have been moments where leading up to us doing this that I thought, oh my goodness, this is much bigger, right? Like this is really just
Mhm.
authentically, publicly being who I am.
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't have the fear that I
Mhm.
did back then because I have spent, that's probably, God, I don't know how many years ago that was, but I have spent those years in between just really honoring
Mhm.
and loving my
Mhm.
authentic self.
Mhm.
Um, and I didn't mean to direct this conversation to about me, but it's just really an example of when we look at how we can listen to the guidance that we're receiving
Mhm.
and trust that the guidance that we're receiving
Mhm.
is going to propel us in a positive way.
Mhm.
But also, it's not just about that because maybe some people listening or watching aren't there yet, right? To
Mhm.
to to hearing that guidance, to knowing that guidance.
Mhm.
But I can promise you, if you are walking in a life that is completely authentic to who you are,
Mhm.
and you're getting in tune with that piece of who you are, there really is nothing to fear.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean we won't have fear from moments. I don't mean that. I still, of course, have fear at times, but it really is this like release. It's
Mhm.
this moment of, well,
Mhm.
I'm going to be me and it's
Mhm.
okay to be me and
Mhm.
I love me and maybe not everybody's going to love me and that's okay, but I love me and I know who I am.
Mhm.
And that keeps me from living in a place of fear. And again, of course there are fearful moments, right? Like we all have fearful moments. Trust me, like I still with my 11-year-old have
Mhm.
moments of, oh my God, if he does that, what if this happens? Yes, we all have those moments. But I'm really referring to those really big life altering moments that fear holds us back.
Mhm.
Um, and we walk through them because it really is when we're walking through with our authentic self,
Mhm.
no matter if it turns out the way that we thought it would or should or whatever, we're going to be in our highest authentic self, which is going to lead us to the most perfect place.
Exactly. Yes, so, so beautiful. When I think about fear, how it's impacted my life, or, lovely humans who I have, supported or guided, is that piece about our authenticity. It's like our soul, higher self, doesn't have fear, as far as I know. I'm not saying it's a fact, but like, as far as I know. And whenever we do go to do something that's pretty big and it's out of the comfort zone, we're going to have some sensations in our body. And even if we call it fear, well, first of all, when we call it out, it can start to deflate its power over us. Because what are we really afraid of? And it's our small little one inside or whatever, the one that's doubting, like, well, who am I to do this thing or whatever. But there's a reason why, like, well, and funny thing is, that's how I met you, was because you showed up in that group and I was like, oh, I need to know her. Because I was already way into spirituality and psychic and mediumship. And I'm like, oh, I want to work with her. And actually, what really drew me was that, oh, she has a background as, mental health therapist, and she does this. Not that that's a requirement. I've worked with plenty of other psychic, mediums and whatnot that don't have that background, but it was just a very relatable. And I was starting to want to open up myself to go outside that therapist box because I didn't feel like I fit in. I don't fit in to any
Mhm.
traditional therapy community of people. And it can feel, again, scary to put yourself out there to talk about how there's so much more possibility for people to come into their, you know, healing and harmonizing and connection with themselves that often is not an aspect of where what gets focused on in traditional therapy. And so I've really cultivated more of my own reaching out to people like you, definitely. Um, but I'm just like, it's just going outside the box is so scary. And a lot of people, they like the control. They like the, it's got to be proven that such and such and such and such. And it's like what we talk about. I think there is proven is a strong word, but is there some evidence? There's lots of evidence, even if it's anecdotal and experiential. I'm amazed by insights I've had working with you. I'm amazed what's coming up when I'm tuning more into myself. What happens when I'm inviting clients, friends, might not all be like work coaching based, but it's just like being with people
Mhm.
and not being restricted. And for me, it's like I don't even have to understand everything anymore because that's all a head thing.
Mhm.
You get into the knowing. Some of
Mhm.
us have it's a gut feeling or your heart opens up or whatever. And so, like you said, maybe people aren't ready to do, like some people make reference to take the big leap or whatever. When I was back working for an agency as a mental health therapist, oh my gosh. And I knew it wasn't really what I wanted, but I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get my start getting my experience. And I knew I wanted to go out on my own so I can help people in a more deeper, expansive way. And it took me so long because of fear
Mhm.
to take that leap. And everyone was telling me, you're going to do great. Like you're going to. And so I did all the things, like I created my business and, all these things and was all ready to go, but I just couldn't do it. And what happened, I won't get into specifics, but I had to get so feeling done. Like they had a requirement. You have to go through this training before, because it was a school-based mental health program before school starts. And it was heck no. There's nothing about that I'm going to do. And what's so cool is you get that clarity. So even if for any of you who are in a place where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling stuck, I want to really make that next, and it might be a really big step, and you're just feeling like you just can't because of the fear, just know the universe, your spirit guides, whatever resonate, your higher self, it's still they're there for you and with you. So you'll be shown and you'll go through things to get the clarity. So what I needed, I swear I think the universe was like, she won't do this until she's so fed up that the misery is so significant and intense because she just won't trust her gifts enough. She won't trust herself enough. So you're not alone. Like
Yeah.
we're here talking about this, but I mean you're not alone.
Mhm.
Like there's so much more. Oh my gosh.
I just have to say, as you were saying that, and I have shared this with you before, but for our listeners, um, Esmeralda has several times when I have not wanted to move from where I was standing, said to me, I'm going to make you so uncomfortable that you won't be able to stand where you're standing. And you know, some people might think, "Oh my gosh, I don't want my spirit guide to do that."
Yeah.
Right? But it's true though, because sometimes we get so much in our own way, that they're like they've got to push us to a place where we just get out of our way because it's just we can't take anymore.
Yes.
So I remember many years ago, I was in a situation where I really just was not happy with where I was. And, but I thought that I was really very responsible for a lot of other people. And I just stayed and stayed and stayed. And I ended up like leaving without something else, right? Never in my life had I done that. Never have I done that since. Um, but, Esmeralda had made sure I was so uncomfortable that that's how it played out. But literally within 24 hours, the next door opened.
Mhm.
And and it was such a better door. I mean, it was it was such a better door. It was so beautiful.
Mm.
And I couldn't trust it. Like, I mean, it's like, and probably if she hadn't made me that uncomfortable, I
Mhm.
wouldn't have seen the door.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
And that's why they do it sometimes, right? They make us so
Yeah.
uncomfortable because
Yeah.
we won't see the other door, or the door has closed and we keep trying to open it.
Right.
We keep trying and trying and trying and knocking, and
Yes.
we miss all the five other open doors because we're still
Yeah.
trying to open that other door.
Right. That tunnel vision, which is us feeling all alone.
Yeah.
Like, or sometimes it's like I need to do this on my own so I'm strong. Or, we have all these beliefs that run
Yeah.
why we are experiencing what we're experiencing. And I think we've said this in one of our other episodes. I think it's such a significant thing that the difference between this is all happening for me, not to me.
Yes.
Like Esmeralda in that example, she's not trying to torture you. She just knows you're meant to move forward, to expand. And that's how the universe and all of our higher self and the angels and all the realms, like whatever resonates for people, they see so much more.
Hmm.
Like, and we're not down here as powerless, helpless humans. It feels that way, and I'm not minimizing that, but just know it's, and so maybe what's starting to pop in is like, and we talked a little bit about the how, and I think every time you and I talk about a little two or a little thing, it's all along the same lines. To get you more connected in here, it's going to help with everything. It's going to help you with your fear. It's going to help you get grounded. It's going to help you here with whatever ready level of readiness or openness. Hear, see, feel, experience. We all experience differently. And so to make some time for ourselves,
Hmm.
some time to get quiet. And a lot of times people immediately, anyone who's never done any level of or is has struggled with meditation, and boy, when we use the word term meditation, we know lots and lots of ways. And when you and I use that term, it's not like the type of meditation when you're and you're in this position and I mean, there's so many teachings out there. And I know when I'm just out in public and someone asks me what I do, and well, there was one time and we got into some conversation about meditation came up, and this woman said, I can't do it because I can't clear my mind. I'm like, oh my goodness, no, no, no. It doesn't have to be any way, first of all, and you don't have to clear your mind. If you're tuning in, just get in touch with what are my thoughts? Like you can become
Hmm.
like an observer, which means it's not all taking over, which means you're tapping into more of your higher self aspect and the divine. Let all of that. There's wonderful guided ones. You can just sit and tell yourself, I'm just going to sit here for 5 minutes, 2 minutes,
Yeah.
right? Just find some peaceful time just for you. Go for a walk in nature if you don't like to sit still. Just
Yeah.
allow something else than other your thoughts to dictate and sort of control where you're at. And you'll gently, hopefully gently, sometimes it's a big wow, like you might have a big leap with that or whatever, but not even needing to have any expectations. And there's nothing to accomplish. There's not an agenda. There's not even a goal
Hmm.
other than to be with yourself. And I'll pass that
Absolutely.
over to you as we're just like beginning, just talk a little bit about like what supports us to do that, to hear and be more open and allowing to the wisdom that can come in.
I think it's important to take a second to acknowledge that many people who have particularly experienced sexual trauma, that they don't want to go inside themselves. Okay. I want to make a
Right.
reference to that. And
Mhm.
um, I know that I've already disclosed on this podcast that I am a survivor of sexual trauma in my childhood. Um, so I want to acknowledge that
Mhm.
many people who don't want to go inside themselves um, have experienced that type of trauma. And one of the things that as I was working through, I've told y'all, um, I was not successful with meditation when I started. And, I can't tease out for you whether that had to do with the trauma or the ADHD because I have both, but I can't really tease those things out for you. But it it really was okay for me to do the 2 to 3 minutes that Esmeralda really taught to me, because it wasn't that I was spending these really long times within myself, um, and then it became easier and easier. But I think probably one of the biggest things I did, and this was not in, which I think probably it is used in traditional therapy sometimes, but one of the biggest things that I did for myself, um, really, is I really honored the little girl inside of me. The little girl who had to grow up way too fast, the little girl who didn't have the ability to be a little girl, in many ways, not across the board, but in many ways, um, lost that innocence at a very, very young age. Um, I was 4, 5, 6 years old. And but I really, when I started going inside of myself, and I have to say, I'm just going to be really transparent here. Um, I really found myself disgusting. I absolutely did. I thought I was dirty. I thought there was so many things. And just know if that is something you have experienced and that is something that hasn't been worked on or healed within you, it is possible. It is possible to overcome that. I would recommend traditional therapy in that case. But there's other practices too to bridge, as we've talked about. But I want to acknowledge this because I am a person who experienced this, and I know how difficult that journey is to want to go inside of yourself. But one of the things that I did, aside from EMDR and therapy and these other things, was I really got connected with the little girl inside of me, because we do all have little girls, little boys, whatever, inside of us that are still in there that were hurt, for one reason or another. And I really got in tune with her, and I really just told her, how sorry I was and how much I loved her. And I utilized a pillow, I just want to say, and hugged the pillow like I was hugging the little girl inside of me, and talk to it. And there were a lot of tears. Let me be clear. There were a lot of tears. And I just also, one of the things that I needed to do for her was, and this may sound strange, but I needed to forgive her, because she blamed herself. And I had to acknowledge that she blamed herself. Was she at all at fault? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Let me be clear on this podcast. She absolutely was not at fault, but she blamed herself. And so I had to forgive her, and I had to acknowledge for her that it was not her fault. And so I know that I just really went off to the side with this, but I really felt like this was a really important thing to address, because there are people who avoid going within themselves. And there are very valid reasons for that.
Yes.
And again, I really do recommend traditional therapy combined with other practices like what we talk about too, because healing trauma is really important. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Um, but really, that practice of getting in tune with the hurt part inside of you, is part of that journey. And that's where you have to start. And really, whether you have experienced that same journey or not, we have all experienced something that hurt us as children, whether that be, and I'm not minimizing any trauma, let me be clear, but whether that be that we were in the second grade and our second grade teacher bullied us in front of the class, or if we had a bully in second grade, or if we, were talked down to by our parents, or if we were physically abused by our parents or someone else, or whatever that might be. Um, I think that it is very, very important to recognize the child within all of us.
Mhm.
as we begin this journey
Yes.
of going within. And I'm going
Yes.
to volley back to you, Stacy.
Absolutely. Just so beautiful that you brought that in. And so many things were, coming in for me, whether personally, even professionally, with regard to like options for people and whatnot, but safety in being with you. And the ones that have been hurt and traumatized are the little ones inside. This adult version self is not the one directly. It's all connected. This is just one possible way to see it. Not ever trying to sound like this is fact. This is what has resonated for me. And then when I'm guiding my clients in trauma work, and even trauma, like you said, there's so many, and we're not trying to list off all the types of traumas, but it's real, but it's also based on perception of I wasn't safe, I was alone. And then we do immediately go to it's my fault, I'm no good, I'm not lovable. And those little ones inside, as Terry's mentioning, they need the love from our own self because they're lost back there. I love that. I mean, now more than ever, you mentioned a few names, EMDR and such, and I love to do EFT tapping and matrix reimprinting with people. But those are type the matrix reimprinting as well as others. It does the inner child healing. And that does need to come from a qualified, trained professional. Like that's not something we can do alone. And so recognizing where you're at with anything that we ever suggest, it's do you feel safe? And very commonly in the lovely book, and I'm a trauma informed therapist right from the very get-go. I got into mind body connection trauma because without an embodiment piece, I'm not going to go off on what therapy is all about, but it's to honor all of our entire human experience, and then we're adding spirituality to that now. But as far as like more traditional therapy, to really get to recognize, and especially for so many women I work with, being in their body isn't safe for a lot of really good reasons that are very often trauma related. And you add that to we live in a world where we're encouraged to live from here up. And so yeah, if you notice you're blocked, like you're like, oh gosh, I can't do that. It's not to push through to be like, well, they talked about this, so I should be able to do this. And it's like, no, you start. That's one of the reasons I got into the EFT tapping. It's because you just validate right where you're at, and you don't go into trauma memories by yourself. And I'm not going to guide you into it right now. There's other resources for that, but you can just honor right where you're at
Mhm.
before you maybe try other things that involve getting a little more quiet or whatever. And so part of the point here too, is that there's so many lovely options, so many lovely options. And we want to bring in some ideas here, share a little bit about nuances of our story, our experiences. And the piece that made a really big difference for me was when I started to get some support, initially from therapists, but then coaches, including Terry and other people that really help you connect with all that you are. Because ultimately, that's going to help us know it's like we've forgotten all that we are. But with that trauma piece, right? It's just like you have to figure out, like, well, what's the next right step for me? But we love bringing in these conversations because it's not really talked about that much.
No, it's really not. And one of the other things that I just want to mention, and although I do this work, I'm not saying contact me for this work, okay? Because
Oh,
I
good
also,
point.
um,
That's a good point.
yeah, but
Right.
I wanted to speak about Reiki for a minute,
Mhm.
and it is something that I do. However, I very much value Reiki in person. So you
Yeah.
know, I'm never going to turn somebody down, but I
Mhm.
very much value Reiki in person.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
So let
Mhm.
me be really clear. I am not trying to plug for y'all to
Mhm.
contact me for
Right.
that. Okay.
Right.
Um, but I think that Reiki, now again, I value traditional therapy. I am going to be very clear about that. Even as a spiritual healer,
Mhm.
I value traditional therapy. But one of the things that Reiki does, it's for those who have not been exposed to Reiki. I would imagine many people watching us, you found us because you do know some things, right?
Mhm.
But if you have not, it's really about energy balancing, energy healing, and our seven chakras. Um, I I value Reiki, and I really think that when you have trauma specifically, um, Reiki can be very valuable. Again, I'm not saying skip the therapy realm. I'm not saying that.
Mhm.
But Reiki can be very valuable for one of the things that one of my biggest blocks because of trauma was in my
Mhm.
throat chakra, about, speaking out for myself and, being able to communicate clearly and all of those things. But I also had some heart chakra blocks um, because of so much hurt, so
Mhm.
much trust that was lost,
Mhm.
in people that I should have been able to trust, right?
Mhm. Right.
And I have to tell you, before I was ever a Reiki practitioner, I went for a Reiki session, and I left that session um, a new human being. Like,
Mm.
it was one
Beautiful.
session,
Mm.
not that I didn't do any more ever, but that's not what I mean. But I left a hugely different person. Um, and it's so funny because the person who I went to someone who was very, very good, who had been practicing for many, many years and also trains other people.
Mm.
Um, and and it was a male, which was shocking that I would go to a male, right? Like,
Mhm.
that was a
Mhm.
shocking thing to begin with. Um, but was just a beautiful human being. And the things that he moved out of my chakra system, and the beautiful things that swirled, that were left behind, really. And if you have a really good Reiki practitioner, they're even going to be able to tell you things about yourself,
Mhm.
um, and
Mhm.
about your personality and about who you are, that
Mhm.
you know, because they see things in colors, right? Like, that's how that is done. They see light.
Mhm.
And it really is something I'm just plugging it. Find
Mhm.
somebody local to you. Again, I'm not telling you to do that. I can do long distance. I don't prefer to. I
Mhm.
think in person is best.
Mhm.
Find somebody highly recommended where you are, and try a session, because it definitely can balance the energy for you as you're in this work, learning how to do it for yourself.
Exactly. I love that you just said that because while we are so much about like empowering you with whatever information, all the things we're sharing, we still need some help, some guidance. And I've had so many powerful sessions of so many different energetic modalities. They've all been tremendously helpful. Whether it's EFT tapping, I've had like theta healing and Reiki, and I love to explore. Like, I just think it's so fun to try out new things. And some have been very structured types of modalities and things like that. And so there's just options. You're not alone, and we're certainly not saying, oh, you should always be able to figure it out just on your own. Um, but you will more and more be able, as
Mhm.
ease the nervous system down, especially, and when we use the word trauma, we're using it very also loosely because, I love people. There's some teachings like Bessel van der Kolk, and there's a gentleman, of course, now that I want to say his name, like he's a Hungarian gentleman, but he had defined trauma, and I'm going to not get his words exactly right, but what it meant to me resonated in the sense of we feel separated from ourself. Like there's almost like a split, a separation, like anyone who's experienced disassociation, right? That that's what the one of the impacts that happens. So if we're separated from ourselves, and then that kind of becomes, it can feel like that becomes the self. So the me of I'm no good, and we just grow up believing that, and it's not our truth. And so I know I've also seen in people where, well, I haven't had a significant trauma because I'll self-disclose a little bit here. So like the piece of like emotional neglect from parents
Mhm.
is a trauma. And
Mhm.
I did not, I was always like, what? Like I had a pretty good upbringing, like what? Or there could be things that are blocked because they can get blocked, different traumas, but in my
Absolutely.
awareness. And it wasn't until Besser Van was one of the first people to hear I heard say that. And it's like, wow, to not be attended to as you need, ongoing, once or twice, nothing, trauma is not, I mean, those types of things. Now, if something outwardly is done physically, that's one time, boy, that's profound. But I mean, one time of a parent not really paying attention is not going to cause usually, but the ongoing patterning of that. And so light bulbs start going off because sometimes we can just minimize. Like, okay, well, I didn't have any of that happen to me, but I don't feel good about myself. And I'm really afraid of da, 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 da. And it's like, there are things you have experienced in your perception of who you are. You might feel like you don't mean much to other people, like things like that, right? So then we decide things about ourselves, and those become core beliefs, and we grow up with them. And it isn't just about the beliefs, it's the energetics and all the emotions and embodiment of that. Because people talk a lot about beliefs, and I won't go off on that, but it's like, oh, just shift your, get rid of your limiting beliefs. Okay, there's so much more to it than that.
Mhm.
There's this embodiment of who we believe we are and how we experience it physically. So
Yeah.
whatever your experience has been, if you're struggling, and it may not necessarily be about I got to find the trauma, but just opening up to like, okay, there might be just more here that I get to learn about and discover about myself as you come into whatever experience is like for you of self-love.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just and I'm not gonna, maybe we can continue next episode,
Yeah,
but I'm going to
sure.
drop something that we can continue next episode
Great.
when you talked about, the possibilities of why this stuff is here. We can get into next episode things we've brought in from past lives,
Love
right?
that.
Like, because
Yes.
there's all kinds of complications, right? That
Yes.
like, and I've talked about in a previous episode about someone I worked with who
Mm,
brought something in from a past life that got triggered in this life from
yes.
one episode, right? Like, so we will dig all into that in next
Yes.
episode because that would take us a whole lot longer. But no, I think this is perfect. This is a perfect place to
Yes.
kind of say, to be continued in the
Yes.
next episode. So I guess we kind of will kind of have a plan of where to start next episode. We usually don't, um, but because of trying to go, this is such a good conversation.
Yes.
Really
Yes.
having that place to kind of jump from doesn't mean that's where we'll stay the whole episode, but stay tuned and
Yes.
we will continue this conversation and the impacts of past lives into what's going on with us today too.
Beautiful.
Great to see you
Yeah.
today. And
Thank
I
you.
thanks everybody for joining us. It has
Yes.
been a beautiful day for sure.
It has. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Bye for
Bye.
now.